Hi, how's it going? This is President of Collinwood for YouTube. I'm back to continue my read-along review for To Benight and Beguile, written by John Philip Betancourt. Book 2, Chapter 6. I have not lost count. See? A most violent act. A blanket fog rolled over the sea like a river of clouds, carving a path over a rough ocean. The white caps rocked a large ship at dock that was raising anchor, that morning headed east to Europe, where the passengers, most of them Americans traveling from other parts of the country, were setting sail on holiday. All except one, a woman who was the only passenger to board from Welshport. She wore a thick blue cloak that covered her head and the dark blue dress that was under it. She concealed the lower half of her face with a thick wool scarf, only showing her blue eyes as she handed the ship's boarding attendant her one-way ticket, with thus Gibraltar, welcome aboard, he grinned. The woman said nothing, but her eyes showed that below her scarf she smiled. The attendant, knowing she was the only person to board at this port, tried to help her with one suitcase, but she yanked it herself and quickly made her way to her personal quarters. She was lucky enough to have been able to purchase with the help of her benefactors. She placed her items in her room and carefully made her way back to the back of the ship, still covered in her cloak and scarf, and watched as the island of Welshport, Maine itself got smaller and smaller in the distance until the horizon was just a thin blue line or blue sea. Only then she did feel safe. Only then did she feel comfortable enough to reveal herself to be Georgina Kent in Mary Good's body, free from the trappings of the Lord family and heading somewhere no one would ever find her. Thanks to Eliza and Mary, Georgina's new body would give her safe passage aboard, but she was warned never ever to return to Welshport. Georgina was perfectly fine with that one stipulation. She never would return. Across the small channel of water that split Welshport Island and Good Island from mainland Maine, the four-story compound psychiatric hospital where Evie was being held felt more like a prison. The many winds that made up the far end of the hospital had cells instead of rooms, and the actual areas where patients could get help from their doctors was nothing more than small office rooms with cold white painted walls, nothing on the windows to hold back the day's burning sun. Evie, however, was being held on the north end of the building. The older part was darker, the walls were covered in wood panels, and the windows were tall and diamond grilled that allowed for dramatic geometric shapes to rain down on the hard tiled floor when the afternoon light came in. In his office, the beleaguered psychiatrist Dr. Kim prepared for the latest session with the most important patient in all, Evie Jordan Lord. His task was to vanquish all of her unhealthy memories that the family saw as haunts that kept her mind ill. Rebecca, in particular, was insistent that any session going forward used electric shock therapy to finally rid her granddaughter-in-law of visions of the supposed dead Sebastian. Rebecca wanted Evie back, but she wanted Evie clean of the mental ghost. Ghosts, of course, that were fabricated and manipulated by Rebecca's wicked son, Jacob, who only saw Evie as a barrier between him and the massive Lord Publishing inheritance he felt he was solely entitled to. Rivals like Evie be damned. Dr. Kim rifled through papers and signed off medications for other patients at his desk, worried about what to do with Evie when she came in. She was resistant to his therapy. She was much more astute than Rebecca and Jacob gave her credit for, and that made it more complicated to get into her head. She held off his prodding, she held off his questions. In fact, she was at times a complete waste of time. Could he really use the shock therapy as Rebecca requested? He wasn't sure, but he knew that something had to be done if he wanted Jacob to keep his secret he was holding over him. He could not allow it to get out. No one could know the truth if it came out. He would be ruined, destroyed. It would all go away. His practice, his job, everything. As Kim continued to shuffle nervously through his papers, his mind on what to do with Evie when she came in. Evie was shuffling down the hall in a long white hospital dress that scraped the hardwood floors of the hospital hallways. As she walked, she could feel the cool air blowing around her. From an unknown source, there was an open window, no storm leaking through, a cool breeze from outside. Or sorry, there was no open window, but she could feel it. Even the tiny flyaway hairs around her ears blew in the direction the cold air was coming. This way now, over here, an escorting orderly said, pulling on her forearm, guiding her down another long hallway. Do you feel that? She asked him. Feel what? Where is that cool air coming from? It's like being blown from somewhere. You don't feel it? She asked him again, his facial recognition stoic and uninterested. We're late. We're walking fast. You're feeling the air just go around you. Stop making things more than they are. That's probably what got you in here in the first place, the orderly replied. No, stop, Evie said, stopping them both in the center of the hall, as another orderly and patient in a wheelchair passed them. Feel, Evie said as she rushed her arms out and her hands. The cool river of mystery's air was still flowing. She could feel it all around her. The hem of her skirt lifted slightly off the ground with a very cool swipe of air that floated by. He felt nothing. She closed her eyes, feeling the air all around her. It was sea air. She could smell it too. He smelled nothing. All right, all right. You felt this phantom breeze enough. Now, Dr. Kim is waiting, the orderly said, grabbing her again by the upper arm and dragging her to her appointment. Over in a quieter part of the hospital, Evie's new friend, Alice Winterbourne, was blowing on a paper windmill she made. She blew and watched the various colored blades spun around and around in her cool breath, the source of Evie's mysterious wind. Come in, Dr. Kim said, sitting up quickly from his desk as if he was greeting an old friend. Doctor, she said softly as the orderly left the two alone in the office. Evie sat back down on the leather sofa and crossed her ankles. She flattened her skirt of her dress so it lay perfectly on the sofa without a single wrinkle. Despite being locked away in an insane asylum, she was still very aware of how to sit like a lady of the super wealthy. Her back straight, her hands balled in her lap, her neck slightly tilted forward, ready to listen to her session from the supposedly good doctor. You seem very alert today. That is good. How are you feeling? She thought for a second, then answered, confused. Confused? Okay. Tell me about that, he said, moving from his desk to a large matching leather sofa that was in front of Evie. I'm confused about why I'm still doing here. You're not making any headway, Doctor. You and I both know that I am not mentally ill. I never have been and never was. There are probably and truly very ill people here that could better have use of your time, and yet you make appointments for me every day and to sit and talk. We make no forward motion, Evie scolded outright. You've been thinking about this, obviously, Dr. Kim said. removing his glasses and looking over Evie quite curiously. Of course I have. I have nothing else to do but think. I talked to my friend, she said. Friend? You've made a friend? Who? Dr. Kim wondered, thinking it was an imaginary person. Alice. She's a patient here, and she's, well, incredibly interesting, Evie said. Hold, said, holding back the amazing things Alice said to her the other day in the garden. Alice, you're friends with Alice Winterbourne? Kim asked, his voice now tainted with concern. Yes, Eva replied without a beat. Alice had come to Wincliffe years before. She had practically spent a third of her life there. Her brother Matthew, a fisherman on Welshport, and her only living family member had omitted her because of the delusions that she was having. Matthew saw her have strange broken memories that she would scream out in the middle of the night about the sea, the dark, deep sea, the earth, the wilds, the forest and mountains, and how everything was alive and how everything was real and breathing and needed their love. It was frightening to him. He brought her there, and there she stayed, only to stop speaking to anyone for years and years. And eventually Dr. Kim would break her silence, and then Evie. Alice found something special in Evie. She showed Evie her secret connection to the earth, and Evie was curious of her. I should warn you that Miss Winterbourne is somewhat deranged. We've worked on her for a very long time, and we cannot seem to break through to her, which is why she's still here. Alice's brother had long wished for her mind to heal, but alas, she still speaks in riddles, and of strange worlds beyond the sea. I would hate for this to happen to you, which is why we have so many sessions, you and I, Kim replied. I don't find her deranged at all, Eva replied. Miss Lord, you seem to have some intel on Alice that I don't have, which to me seems impossible. Since I've been her doctor for close to 12 years, what exactly did she tell you? Dr. Kim wondered. Those are conversations I think are better left to Alice and myself, Evie said, smirking. Dr. Kim smiled, seeing that Evie was clearly teasing him. She had come into the session this evening with a very particular sense of humor, almost as if she wanted to test him and test what he was going to do to her. But Dr. Kim, a man who was being pressured and practically forced to do incredibly painful electric shock sessions on her, was about to change the tables, or so he thought. I want to go in depth with you, Mrs. Lord. I want to go in depth with you to find out exactly how I can help you make you better. Does that make sense? Dr. Kim asked as he slowly pulled out an electric shock therapy machine, complete with paddles and bite guard, and moved it closer to Evie on the sofa. Her eyes darted for the machine, and she lifted a elbow as she realized what it was. The way you can help me is send me home. Release me, not with what I think that is, she said, mentioning a machine that he as he turned on. It I don't belong here, she added. The machine rumbled and grumbled as its very old style of working continued to fill the room with a loud humming sound. The lights in the room flickered as they were very early type of electric became absorbed by electric shock machine that had been rolled out by Dr. Kim. You think that you don't belong here. You say that all the time, and I just can't for the life of me see why you think that. I have a way to make sure I can rid of the all the haunts all that haunts you, Evangeline. It's in this machine right here. Kim said he picked up one of the paddles. You only do what the Lord's money tells you to do, she said in a hissed voice. From what the family has said about what you were seeing, I think it's necessary, Dr. Kim replied, ignoring Evie's jab at him being brought off by the lords and right before being interrupted. What the family said, Doctor. I think you're getting information from the wrong source. If anything, they're the ones that are making it so that I am here. I never made anything up that I saw. They made those things up to make me believe I was seeing something. And I know for a fact was faked, a farce, all of it. And frankly, I think that perhaps you know that deep inside. I'm not a regular patient like you have here. These poor souls truly need your help, and you're sitting around playing with Jacob Lord's lies about what I saw. Or don't see, it's time you release yourself from their chokehold, Doctor, and I can help you with just let me go, Evie said. Evangeline, why don't you just calm down and we can talk this through, Kim replied as Evie seemed to be getting very agitated. No, I want to get out. I want to get out, she screamed, feeling a heart heat over her face, the blood in her body racing as she shot up from the leather sofa, her hands balled up in two tightly wound fists. Alice was in her room. She was standing up too, her fists in balls just like Evie's, her face red and angry. She was making Evie say these things. She was making Evie fight the doctor because Alice knew too that Evie didn't belong there. She had complete control over the young woman in Dr. Kim's office. I want, Alice screamed. Out, Evie screamed, finishing the sentence Alice started. Calm down. Just calm down, Kim shouted. Evie was out of sorts. She could feel herself angry, but she had no idea how it just happened in that instant. It was abnormal for her. It wasn't what she was feeling when she came into the room. She could only remember the cool breeze that surrounded her and filled her with fresh sea air, and how she wanted to feel the coolness again. She was hot, so hot, sweating. Her forehead was filled with tiny beads of sweat. She was faint. She could feel her heat, her heart racing, and the pounding in her chest felt as if it was a bomb ready to blow. I want, Evie screamed. Out, Alice screamed, finishing her sentence. Dr. King got up from his chair and rushed over to his desk and pressed a small button under the top of his desk, which pulled a small electrical line run bell of alarm for an orderly to race in. He then opened a drawer and pulled out a syringe, what was already pre-filled with a sedative. He rushed back to Evie, who was angry and breathing hard when Dr. Kim got close enough, she slapped him across the face. His glasses flew to the ground with this swing, and his own anger quickly bubbled up. Evie, he said softly but clearly blistering with anger. I don't know what's happening, Evie said in a true moment of clarity. For her part, Alice was only trying to help, but she wanted to help Evie find herself out of Wincliffe. But with the strange outburst, Alice made things worse. Dr. Kim grabbed Evie's arms. She tried to pull away. Alice could feel the grip on her arm, too. Kim pulled the top of the syringe with his mouth and lifted him and plunged the needle into the soft part of her arm. Evie screamed. Alice screamed. The orderly entered the room just as Evie's eyes rolled to the back of her head. Alice, too, fell to her room floor and passed out. Take her to the holdings, the doctor said, his face still staining with her slap. Yes, doctor, the big burly orderly replied. As Dr. Kim assessed what just happened with Evie, he wondered just how sick she actually was. Could she truly be insane, as the Lords believed, or was being at Wincliffe making her this way? He wasn't sure on the actual cause of her mental break in his office, but what he was sure of was that perhaps Rebecca's surgeon of electrotherapy was the correct one. The holdings, as Dr. Kim ordered Evie to be taken, were a part of the hospital where patients went when they became unruly and out of control. They were taken and placed in a white padded cells in straitjackets. Kim's first attempt to give Evie shock therapy didn't make it past the conversation part. But now she was in the holding. She would have a date set aside, just like the other patients that were held there for shock therapy. It was hospital policy. Quick, Quickly, Kim pulled out Evie's file and stretched out the second shock therapy session that was scheduled for 2 weeks from his failed first one. He changed it to the very next day. The flickering of candles in a large east wing bedroom reflected an orange glow on the walls like the setting sun outside. This part of Terramore Mansion had yet to have the newest invitation of electrical outlets. It was Jacob's bedroom, and he was in his private adjoining bathroom getting ready for the night's sleep when someone entered his room without his knowledge. The person slowly made their way around the room, looking at all Jacob's belongings. This was a desk in the corner of the room in the shadows where no candle could reach it. It was a desk filled with papers and files from the family publishing business that needed to be looked over and signed by Jacob before they went up to Rebecca for final approval. The person filed through the papers but made sure to lay them back down as they were before they touched them. Then they walked over to a large bookcase filled with some of history's most famous novel stories that made up all the world's most beloved love stories and horror stories. The person ran their hand across the edges of the book that were exposed and walked over to another part of the room where Jacob had a large almirah that they opened, and it looked at all his clothes. As the person sifted through the shirts and jackets and the hangers, a mirror was exposed at the back of the almirah reflecting the face of Celeste de Vinny. She had come to Jacob's room to hide and to finally do what Charlotte and Sabrina had been plotting for a few weeks now. Jacob's murder. It had to be done. They all had decided he had to be stopped before he could do any more harm. He had already found a way to wrongfully commit Evie to an insane asylum on the mainland to keep her out of the family inheritance. He had Sebastian killed, so he thought, and framed his own brother for the murder of Sabrina, and even mangled the hand of Celeste's beloved Philippe in a terrible drunken car accident years ago. The madness and selfishness had to stop, and Celeste was convinced that she had to be the one to do it. For Evie and Sebastian, for David and Sabrina, for Charlotte and Mary, for Philippe. She reached into her pocket and her apron and pulled out a sharp pair of scissors. She put her fingers in the holes and opened and closed the shining iron tools and took a deep breath as she heard Jacob finishing up in his private bathroom for the night. She quickly rushed over and hid behind the thick dark drapes that hung in front of the bedroom windows. Jacob emerged from his bathroom in his night jacket, exposing the very top of his chest that still glistened from the bath he had. His hair was wet and dripped down his neck, forming a small pool on the flat portion area where his neck met his chest. He went over to the desk in the corner and lit a large candle, allowing the light to brighten his face, and he pulled the towel from around his shoulders and dried his hair. When the towel went over his face, Celeste slowly came out from behind the drapes with the scissors clutched tightly in her hand above her head to drive down into Jacob, who had his back turned to her, drying his hair. She slowly walked toward him, but her dress brushed up against the large potted palm and made a noise that startled Jacob, who quickly turned and grabbed hold of Celeste's wrist. Well, 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 what do we have here? A sly murderess in the mist. Remove your hands, said, her eyes setting with anger. Miss Davinia, this attempt at murder will truly look poorly on your working evaluation, Jacob said, pulling Celeste close to him by the wrist so that their noses were almost touching. But I can overlook this incident under one condition, he said. Let's go, she Let go, she replied, still growling with anger. Jacob released Celeste from his grip with such a force that her arm flew back, down. He stepped back from Celeste and walked over to his bedroom door and locked it from the inside, then turned to Celeste, whose whole body had stiffened with fear and anger and frustration. What exactly were you thinking of doing to me? With those scissors, huh? Cut my hair? Tailor a jacket of mine? And why? What on earth did I ever do to you? He asked in a mixture of sincere and sarcastic tone. I needed to I needed to do this for everyone you've ever hurt. All over the years that you have done. I needed to do this, Celeste answered. You must have not been thinking clearly. At least that's what I will try if anyone asks or finds out about this. I won't be the one to tell, of course, because you will repay me for this, but should it ever come out that you attempted to murder me with a pair of scissors, I will always protect you. This house has a way of making people do bad things that I can attest to from my own experience, Jacob replied, coming close to Celeste. You killed Sabrina, not David. It was you, Celeste said finally and bravely, accusing Jacob for the first time ever of Sabrina's murder. Why do you say that? He asked slowly, still coming closer to her. Doesn't matter how. I just know, and I know more. I know everything that you have done and think you need to pay for it, even if it means with your life, Celeste replied. Jacob smirked. He placed the wet towel over his hair and the desk and looked at Celeste with a dangerous stare. He felt very attracted to her. He could see how beautiful she truly was and how lucky Philippe was to have her. In fact, he wanted her. He had always felt a connection to her, an attraction, but never acted on it until the day of Sebastian's wedding when he saw her looking more beautiful than she had ever looked before. That is when he came up with the idea to have her become Charlotte's new governess. But so many other plans had to come up first before he could finally ask her. Celeste, who felt the nerves in her body shaking and causing her heart race to begin to race and pump, the blood in her body at quicker pace. He came closer and closer to her, finally brushed up against her hand with his hand and pushed the scissors from her hand and through the across her. You're a very beautiful woman, Celeste, he said, a slithering snake-like voice. Her skin felt cold. She felt like she was about to vomit. You know what I You know that I know things, too, don't you? About you, he whispered. What do you know? She asked, pulling away from him, still trapped in his grasp. Do you really think I would employ anyone in this house and I didn't have dirt on? Don't be silly here. Look, he said, finally giving her personal space and pulling out a file from the pile on his desk and handing it to her. She opened it and her eyes became wide with horror. It was a file on her, a file that she had no idea anyone had ever made. There were things about her family in that file, things that she had never told anyone, things about her mother and father, things that, if spoken out loud, would shame her, torture her, and destroy her reputation all over the island. If any of the information in that file were to come out in the general public, she could never get a job in Welshport or even Maine ever again. Why do you have this? Why would you even look for this? She asked. Tears began to fill in her deep brown eyes. It's like I said, I always make sure to have an insurance policy on anyone that I am interested in. You've been on my interest list for a very long time. Of course, I had to wait for the right moment to break it to you, but it's like I said, you'll pay me back for this, and it'll be worth it for you, especially, he answered. You keep mentioning payment. You pay my wages. Just keep them. They should be payment, she replied. Oh, no, no, no. I'm not talking about monetary monetary payment, my dear. I want payment in the form of something that I have lacked for so long. The form of love, he answered. Love, she balked. Love who? You want me to love you? How can I love a murderer? How can I love a man who's a horrible, disgusting creature like you? What have you done to deserve anyone's love, Celeste? Added to Jacob's surprise. Deserve? Is anyone really truly deserving of love? Probably not, at least I don't think so. But you will give me that what I want, Celeste, or I'll go to the authorities with that file. And don't you even try to think about ripping up those pages. That file is for you. I have my own. Imagine this whole town will think of a woman like you who came from a family like yours with a history as it does. You'd have nothing. Everything would be taken from you, especially Philippe. He wouldn't be able to look you in the eye ever again. But I can make sure no one ever sees or knows the truth. I can keep your secret safe. Just give me what I want, Jacob said as he undid his knot on his bathrobe jacket filling his chest. Celeste, Celeste felt the grotesque feeling of wanting to vomit again. She saw Jacob go over to his bed and pull back the large comforter and smile. He wanted her body. He wanted to connect with her how she connected with Philip. He wanted to feel her like lovers felt each other, and all she could do was think about rushing over to where the scissors were and grabbing them and slitting his throat right then and there. Then she looked at the file and he had on her and thought about her father who had died, her elderly mother whom she supported and lived on the mainland, and her younger sister whom she also supported while she studied in Paris. She could not let the contents of that file be released. Her plan with Charlotte to kill Jacob for the sake of all people at Terramore House and Yellen itself had failed. She could not get the revenge she sought. She could not take his life and save anyone else's from his evil now, because Celeste herself was now in short in his treacherous grasp. He sat down on the bed and winked at her. Celeste was shaking. Her hands were clasping a fist at her stomach. She walked over to the bed slowly. Her heart rate faster and faster. She wanted to die. She wanted him to die. She couldn't believe what was happening to her. She sat on the opposite side of the bed, took a deep breath, and lay back. Jacob, like a hungry Cheshire cat, grinned and rolled over on top of her and began to kiss her neck, then her chest. Then he began to undress her slowly and kiss her whole body. She stared at the ceiling and did what he wanted with her body. She cried silently. He wiped her tears. A half an hour later it was done. He rolled back over after kissing her passionately on the lips and pulled up his pajama bottoms and fell asleep. He felt satisfied. He truly did have an attraction to her, but the evil in him had it come out in terrible Jacobine type of way, maliciously and filled with cruelty. Celeste got up from the bed and got dressed. She walked over to the mirror and fixed herself up, then looked down at the file on her that had been spilled out on the floor and broke down again in tears as the clock struck midnight. The, the clock in the room tolling the midnight hour like the death knell for Celeste's spirit and Charlotte and Sabrina's murder plot. Jacob had won again. As the night continued on a small horse-drawn carriage come down Moonstone Path on the mainland and up to the Wincliffe Sanitarium, it was a taxi carriage from the old town of Marina that brought two people from a late-night ferry from Welshport. The oil lantern door flickered and flashed as it lit the face of an existing Sebastian Lord. He alone, with the new Mary Good, came to Wincliffe ready to find and free Evie, just as Mary and Eliza had promised him. Mary, now on Georgina's body, paid the fare and dashed up to Sebastian, who was already on his way into the hospital like a bolt of lightning and eager to gain his lover back in this area. It didn't matter that he was now a shadow lurking member of the race of the undead. Evie was his wife and soulmate. Stop, what are you doing? You can't just go in there, Mary said in her new voice. Why not? Sebastian asked as they stood in front of the lawn at the hospital. First of all, it's past midnight. We're not supposed to be here. We have to be more covert about it. We have to sneak in, Mary said. Sebastian agreed, and the two of them slowly sneaked off into the shadows of the hospital, ready to break in and free Evie once and for all. Okay, guys, that's the read along. I think it's real interesting now. He has gotten dirt over the years on people. Jacob has, so he's got dirt on Celeste, and she can't let the dirt of her fam it get out because she's supporting a bunch of other people. So he's got that on her. Um, so she allowed Jacob to sleep with her. Um, she didn't like whatever, but also, Evie, you know, um, Evie didn't get shock treatment, but they gave her an injection to put her to sleep because Alice Winterbourne didn't do her any favors. Now, I like the scene setting. I do find it curious that I was sort of wondering if we were going to get anything from Rebecca in this chapter, but no, because you got to be thinking Rebecca's thinking something like, "What do I do?" Oh God, really, really good. Really good. Link will be in the description box, guys. Go check this out. It'll be in there. Bye bye.